The current recession is a debt crunch. There is no shortage of funds in society. But the government, business people are short of money. Saying that there is no shortage of funds in society is the only capital. A lot of money. But they don't invest, they don't consume. Just save it for the winter. They are well aware of the current form. Lack of funds everywhere. It means that the government is owed by the local government. And the long-term pressure of China to debt. Not lightly pressed. And 3 years of masks enable enterprises to operate under heavy pressure. What about the people because of the mortgage pressure? Credit card stress. Pay back a lot of income every month. So they are short of money. From January to April this year, the profits of industrial enterprises across the country fell sharply by 20.6%. The largest decrease in profits was among private companies, a decrease of 22.5%. So what does that mean? The private sector. Basically, it is the consumption of goods for people's living needs. State-owned enterprises are basically monopolies. Enterprise and equipment manufacturing. The profits of private enterprises have plummeted. It shows that internal demand has been seriously reduced. And internal demand is falling. Epidemics are just a tipping point, but not the root cause. The fundamental reason is that the debt ratio of the people is too high. The household leverage ratio exceeds 60%. The Bank for International Settlements estimates that the leverage ratio of China's residential sector is 70%. Over the past 40 years, our country has encountered economic difficulties. It is all about providing loan assistance to enterprises. The situation encountered this year, it's different than it's been in decades. This year, the common people have no money, unable to drive consumption. All previous measures have failed. If it is still recommended to revitalize the industry, the strategy of making loans is bound to fail. As you can see from last year's data, 28 trillion loans issued last year, GDP only 7 trillion. Most of the loans did not go into the consumer sector at all. Repair the house with great effort, producing goods vigorously. As a result, the number of sales is very limited. If there is no epidemic, reduce consumption of ordinary people. Consumption will be delayed for a few years. But because of the epidemic, this situation is advanced. The debt crisis broke out early. From China's economy over the past few decades. Driving force. Mainly investment, export, and consumption. Investment is divided into government investment and enterprise investment. A large part of government investment is infrastructure investment. Business investment. Most of them are expansion and real estate enterprises. The export industry has undergone certain industrial upgrades in the past 20 years. From the original low-end industrial products into one, the basis point product, endpoint. But the United States and Canada have directly increased exports. It's hard to increase significantly. However, due to the expansion of local debt, growth is also declining. The main thing is consumption. Real estate consumption is falling off a cliff. Consumption of basic goods is even deflating. All 3 roads are blocked. The future is bleak, at least in the medium term. At the root of it all, the current economic situation, the debt of the whole society is too high, and the resulting possible recession. This time, it's not like the problems we've had in decades. It used to be underproduction, or the economic crisis caused by the lack of appearance. This time it's the beginning of a capitalist economy. And it is very standard that the real estate, induced by excessive mortgage, and Japan's economic recession in the late 1990s. 1925 Florida housing bubble. The 2008 sub-crisis bears great similarities. Examples made abroad with hundreds of years of history. Our country is still likely to fall into it. The history of mankind can't be taught. In the face of interests, they consider themselves the most special. But none of them are special. Some people say that it is better to print money without money. Engage in the Chinese version of QE. It is no problem to engage in Q1 on the production side, but the problem now is that it cannot drive consumption. The consumer side can only be solved by sending money to the people. In the past, the solution was to give loans to enterprises. Create jobs. Local governments engage in infrastructure to create jobs. Make workers pay by creating jobs. Use this indirect means of sending money to spend freely. And here's the rub. Property produced. No one bought the product. It is a serious overcapacity. Expand production again. It will only produce more real estate goods that no one buys. The people are too indebted. Dare not consume. Can you forgive the debt? Keeping people out of debt. There is no way to resolve the emerging crisis. In the early years, local liabilities were subject to basic inspection. It was called the basic inspection maniac at that time. A lot of people are not sensitive to debt. I think it will be solved by using the general account to write off in the future. That's okay in the long run. Inflation sterilization over the next 20 years is a good idea. But this hurdle will be difficult to pass right now. Without financial assistance from the central government. Standard hidden local debt and debt repayment pressure. It's just hard to pay the interest. It has moved to public transportation. Before the subway was released. This is just the government level. Enterprise level. The goods produced cannot be sold. Only price cuts to fight price wars. For example, the car price war and mobile phone price war at the beginning of the year. The decline in corporate profits will inevitably lead to wage cuts and layoffs. Unemployment will increase significantly. The number of new young employees will decrease. You can see the seriousness of the problem from the side. First, many cities in Meituan are full this year. The second is that there is a full garden warning in many cities. Third, the wages of screwdrivers are declining. Fourth, the top real estate companies are obviously laying off staff. The fifth is the layoffs of internet manufacturers. The sixth is the layoff of the Century Institute. This represents technology. Corporations and low-end manufacturing companies are laying off employees in multiple ways. Unemployed people flock to. Even a job like Meituan Didi is hard to find. This is the biggest difference from previous years. The economy has no new sources of growth. In the past 20 years. In 2008, it developed in Nank Internet in season. Internet companies are still thriving, and this year is the end of the internet business. There is no new economic growth point. Only engage in stock games. We can only engage in price wars. It was brutal. Personal level. Massive public debt. Especially mortgages. Card loan. After 3 years of epidemic, they are actively cutting expenses. The leverage ratio of the residential sector is too high. From the surface business point of view, it has reached 60% emergency insurance. But it's actually way beyond that. Because the distribution of deposits is highly concentrated. A lot of people don't really have much savings. As mentioned above. This year's issue. It's not like it's been in decades. It's basically hard to solve with the old way. According to the principle of factor sparsity. Money goes to a few pockets. 80% of people have no money. How to drive consumption? It doesn't drive consumption. The economy cannot be recycled. Must be a domino effect. The explosion is only a matter of time. Why do central banks spend so much money? The numbers are so huge. But the market is still short of money. Because only floating money. It helps the economy. What's the problem? For not giving the money to the person who should have given it. So some Western countries bypass the banking system. Direct national payment. It worked. There will be no money for everything. It means that there is no effect of sending money because of the capital flows generated by the lower middle class. Most of this is happening in the consumer sector. Of course, it is also useful to issue coupons. Send enough quantity. The problem is when there is no money. I can only give one taste. Not to encourage the stall economy. Is to call for the trunk economy. So you see the street stall economy now. The pedicure economy is so hot. You're not consuming. It's not because of a lack of consumption scenarios, but lack of money. Lack of will, lack of confidence. Or you can keep the house price down. Allow scholars to set aside their budget. Go to the store to buy rice, buy meat, etc., etc. But house prices can't go down. I dare not press. How many people are waiting for this meal? So the inner circle doesn't move. The recession will deepen and spread uncontrollably. Eventually lead to a crisis. The modern economy exists because of the debt cycle. Therefore, economic crises are mostly manifested as concentrated default on debt. The financial crisis that hit the credit system. But the debt cycle was invented. The manifestation of the economic crisis is overproduction. Marx summed up the economic crisis as absolute excess, coinciding with relative scarcity. What is absolute excess? On the one hand, the products produced cannot be sold. For example, milk can only be poured out. Tens of millions of college graduates. You can only lie down in a bottle. It's an absolute surplus. So what is relative scarcity? On the other hand, the rich have ample purchasing power. However, demand has been met in excess. Poor people have needs, but lack of purchasing power. So, in a nutshell, that is, the rich have more income. But the demand has been overmet. What about migrant workers? The desire to consume, but too little income, insufficient spending power, and the absolute reality. The consumer needs of most ordinary people can't be satisfied at all. It suppresses demand. That is to say, the consumption downgrade we've seen. It's a picture of overproduction. Its essence is an economic crisis. The rich, no matter how extravagant, cannot support the economy. Ultimately, it also depends on the large number of lower middle class. Stimulate consumption. Drive the economic cycle. Economic structure problems reflected by consumption downgrade. In fact, it can be summarized in one sentence. Debt goes to the majority. Wealth flows to a few. Once such a structure enters the downward cycle, it creates a negative spiral. Do not destroy this structure. It's impossible to pull it out. While consumption has declined, the problem level reflects. Moving forward is the debt crisis and the divide between the rich and the poor. Pushing back is pessimistic expectations and a lack of confidence. They are not a separate issue. Causality. Mutually reinforcing relationship. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is that only by improving the flow of debt to the majority, an economic structure in which wealth flows to a few, to make consumption hot. Otherwise he will continue to cool down. There is a high probability that he will continue to cool down. So we have to prepare for the arrival of the cold. Prepared.